Hi, and welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love during an election. So happy today to have a wonderful writer and editor, Ruth Goring, talking with us. And Ruth, thank you so much for your time today and welcome.
It's an honor to be here. I've listened to a number of the other interviews, and what a lovely set of people you've been talking to. I haven't, yeah, it's really meaningful to me to be able to participate in this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been really wonderful for me. I was saying before we started recording that this is the last day that I'm interviewing people, and I've learned so much. And I actually suggested to my colleague, Brian Elaine, that we meet at the end when we're both all done with our interviews and talk about some of the things that we've learned and some of the things that have meant the most to us from some of these conversations, because it has been, I've gotten such insight into different communities that I'm not a part of. I've gotten ideas from people on ways to make a difference in my community. I have been inspired by quotes or things from people's work that they've read. It's just been an incredibly rich experience to be able to have these conversations. So I was super glad that you were able to do it as well. So, and I wanted to say that Ruth is the author of some of my favorite picture books. One is called Picturing God, and she's the author illustrator of that book. And that book gives a lot of images for how God is referred to in the Bible, everything from a mother hen to give us some examples. So do you have it right there? Yeah.
I do. It comes up backwards in the image, doesn't it? Or does it for you?
It doesn't for me, but I don't know if it will when it plays back. But
Right, different apps are different that way.
right. Show us some of your favorite spreads in that book.
Sure.
You're looking, I had the wonderful opportunity when Ruth was working on this book to have lunch with her in her home. And she had one room where she had all these art supplies and yarn and beads and paint and all these things just sort of ready because she was creating this book. And so it's really exciting to me now when I see the finished book, because I can see, I remember where it started. I remember seeing the raw materials for it. And it is such a beautiful book. But go ahead, show us some of your favorite.
It definitely took over my house and my life for a while. This is this is the first full opening spread, and I'm just holding it up here so you can see. This is at the beginning of the Light of the World section. I spent a few pages on that.
And you use tiles and broken glass and kind of a
Yes, the sort of style came out of a couple of mosaic workshops that I took, and afterward, a group of friends and I had been learning collage techniques, and I decided to try just gluing down pieces of tile without putting the grout in between them, so it would be lighter. And I really liked that style, and so that was the basis for this. But then I end up using so many things, handmade paper that people have sent me, and netting and different kinds of fabric, and as you said, beads and strings and all sorts of things. This one is about living water, and so the waterfall picture is one that I worked on pretty early in the book, and to me, it's probably central to the book, because this is an image of God's love, and the contrast hopefully will still allow you to see the lack of contrast, perhaps. A little child who's just getting sprayed by the waterfall and just reveling in the vastness of it. Because and to me, that's the very best picture of God's love.
It's so beautiful, and I love that. And we share this publisher, Beaming Books, and I love that you were given such free reign, just to really let your imagination kind of go wild with this, and not, you didn't have to follow a certain style. You didn't say it would all be pastels, or it would all be mosaics, or it would all be collage. You just were able to, create the spreads in this really whimsical, imaginative way. And I really feel appreciative of our editor, Naomi Kruger, but also of Beaming Books, just for letting you go, letting you play.
They really, saw this as a new adventure, just like it was for me. And Naomi had suggestions, most of which, I took and felt that they, improved my art and gave me some new. I mean, she wasn't dictating to me how to do it, but she sometimes in a couple of places she asked me for more or for something stronger, and having to rethink it, made it better. It really did. So it was a wonderful collaboration.
Mhm.
I'll just show you two more.
Okay.
This one is based on the metaphor of putting on Christ. And so I say that God's goodness is like bright clothes we can put on every morning, with faith as a button and peace as the sleeves. And so these are closer up images of children, and I just used corrugated cardboard from boxes that I had sitting around. And the girl's hair is the fringe of a scarf and that was made by an indigenous woman in La Guajira, Colombia. The Wayuu women have wonderful weaving practices, and I just loved how the edge of it could be hair here, and so
It's so pretty.
that I always think of them every time I see that page. Naomi welcomed my imagining God and the imagery of both father and mother. And so this was the image of God as mother, using Jesus cry over Jerusalem, wishing that he could gather the people like a mother hen gathers her chicks. And this has been very meaningful to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And it was just a joy. It was just a joy to make.
I love
So
that you and I both, who write a lot of different things, but part of what we do is trying to create really wonderful books in the spiritual space for children. And I think people are hungry for, non-gendered or non just always masculine um, pronouns for God. And, that book with its different imagery and so out of the box thinking and artwork, I think that has met a lot of people's needs who feel a spiritual longing and a desire to connect, but they also feel maybe they've been hurt in the past by churches or certain religious practices or certain understandings about who God is. And so to provide something like this, which is so out of the box and so lovely, I mean, what a gift you've given. I'm sure you've heard from people.
I find that parents are experiencing just a new they're having new experiences of God themselves, not just the children that they're sharing it with. And I often think, what would it have been like for me to have books like these and like yours when I was a child? I wouldn't have had so much to be healed from and so much to overcome in terms of accessing closeness to God. Because I, as a child, always wanted that. It was, I don't know if it was because of the if it was just because of the pietistic faith that I was brought up in. My parents were in the Plymouth Brethren denomination, which they don't call it a denomination, but anyway, that set of churches. And there's a very devotional, very pietistic direction in the spirituality of that church, but the practice of faith that I experienced usually fell short of that, of something that I could connect to as a child.
Hmm.
And I think it was probably because they were part of the larger evangelical tradition. It's partly because they were part of the larger evangelical tradition that very much emphasizes salvation by confessing your sin, and we would have it drummed into our little heads, both in Sunday school and in reading, that we are very sinful, and it didn't matter that we were very young. That that even, this was given to us as an example of Jesus' love, that even if we were the only human in the world, Jesus would have died for us, for just me. And actually, that is very confusing, or it was very confusing for me as a child, because I didn't experience myself as, deeply sinful. I mean, I could see where I, sometimes, of course, I noticed, that I sometimes told a lie, or I sometimes was envious, or boastful, or something like that. But it that didn't seem to define me the way that the evangelical pietism did. And what I experienced was that I wanted to be close to God. And so I sought God in various ways, especially as I got older. And that brought me into the charismatic movement. It brought me into the contemplative tradition, the liturgical tradition. And I was hungry. I was not, I'd been brought up and had flourished in a lot of ways in a very intellectual kind of Christianity, but my heart was very hungry. And I have, over the years, found my way to a God that's just bigger than what my childish experience of faith had been able, that I had been able to even imagine. So much bigger than that.
Mm-hmm. And now you have the opportunity to bring healing, or even to prevent some of the damage that was done to you spiritually by your work for children. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. And I don't want to say that I disbelieve in sin. I feel a calling. Part of my calling is to really face the evil in the world, and I don't want my work for children to pretend that doesn't exist, or and I but my I guess my vision is that individual forgiveness of sin and healing from sin and its effects is part of a larger work that God is doing to redeem, to redeem the broken world, and to heal us from the injustices that we have suffered, and and to turn around the injustices that we inflict as part of a society. So my heart is very drawn to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm very grateful that I'm part of a church, an urban Mennonite church in Chicago, where there have been groups of us that have spontaneously decided in the past year to do reading. So I have a couple of books that have been really, really important for me recently, and I just stacked books around myself in preparation for this interview, because
I love that.
This is our life is in books. It's not the only part of life, but it's so important. The late James Cone's The Cross and the Lynching Tree. This is the most powerful exploration to me of theology, and how Jesus' cross speaks to racism in America, and especially the practice of lynching, which continues to go on through our police system. which is so violent against Black people especially. So I'm not finished reading it yet, but this is, First Colossians 1, chapter 1 says that God is reconciling all things to God through the cross. And so I guess I sort of feel like I'm on a dare with God, to face the worst of it and to say, this too is to be redeemed, and that we as God's people need to be part of that process, because God has called us, to be co-workers and friends in what God is doing in the world. And so the other one is one that's gotten a lot of attention recently, and rightfully so. Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I had been discussing this in a mostly white group with a couple of Black folks that are in the group, and it has been very fruitful. And as part of the follow on from that, our church is looking at a document that a sister Mennonite church has drawn up on criminal justice reform, and a call that they want to present to the larger Mennonite church for changes in national policy and of course local policies on how people are treated, especially Black folks, but in the whole system of prisons and the police state that we have. So the books are feeding life and initiatives for change.
Springboards, really.
They can't just stay in on the page.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and in your own work, I mean, when you wrote Adrianas Angels, there are elements there. Do you want to talk about that book of looking at social justice and addressing difficult things? It's not the same kind of book at all as Picturing God. It's a book that addresses hard things.
Yeah, this is a story that I wrote reflecting the experience of some of the Colombian families I know. I grew up in Colombia. My parents were missionaries there. The Plymouth Brethren are very, they have historically been very active in sending folks in mission projects around the world. But that was a great privilege for me to grow up that way. And in the last 20 years or so, I've been really back to finding out what meaning that experience of growing up has in my life and my calling now. And so there was a child and a brother and parents that came to the United States because they received death threats. The father received death threats for his work in Colombia, his political work. He wasn't a guerrilla or anything like that, but he and both the parents were working for social justice in Colombia, and that's a very dangerous thing to do. There's a lot of extrajudicial killing of people who are calling for change, and so I just drew a little bit from their story, but mostly imagined a story about a child who goes through the normal struggles of childhood, but also has this massive dislocation where she and her family are forced to seek political asylum, and how the United States, although we think that everybody in the world wants to come here because it's so great, it's actually a hard place. It's a hard place to come if you are a refugee, and almost many kinds of immigrants. They find it very hard because there's a lot of injustice here that they experience, besides just the difficulties of the change of culture and language and weather and everything. So, but she experiences God's love that's mediated through beautiful angels that she never sees, but in the story we get to see them, and they are bringing God's love to her in various ways through the whole experience. I loved how the artist, who is Mexican American and really identifies with this experience of displacement, even though she wasn't, displaced violently. Her family was not. Just how she really put her heart into the illustrations, and I felt that this closing illustration, which doesn't say anything in words about God being our mother as well as our father, mm-hmm. that it holds the suggestion of the womb and the encircling arms that we would associate with a mother. And so I feel as if children, again, through the illustrations as well as perhaps the story, here are open to the beauty of God and the enormity of God's love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really beautiful. Yeah, I love that book. So what are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm in a transition between homes. I sold my home, and then the next one is getting prepared for me to move in still. And so I'm lodging at a friend's house, and I do not have any of my art supplies here. So I'm not working on art, but I do have a series of wordless picture books that I'm thinking about. And once I get my space set up, my studio set up in my new place, there's going to be a lot of intense work, because I can't wait to get my hands on my materials to start fleshing out these ideas. I have a couple of projects that I'm working on with two African-American friends who I've met through the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators here locally. And one of them is an illustrator, an artist, fine artist, and the other one is a fellow writer. And we have a series of books that we are envisioning that are still taking shape. They were going to be a series of picture books, and it looks now like there'll be a series of illustrated chapter books. Mm-hmm. So that will be a longer project. Chapter book, for those who are not familiar with, it would be something kind of at the level of Charlotte's Web. It could be a little simpler, but the early Beverly Cleary stories would be considered chapter books, I think. The later ones became sort of more emotionally complex, and I would say they would be more like middle grade novels. But ours, I think ours will have a level of emotional complexity too. But there's going to be a whole cast of characters from different cultures and different races, and I think it's going to be really interesting once we can get the first story all pulled together. Mm-hmm. And then I have another one that I know I've talked to you about in the last year or two that I've been working on, and I don't have a publisher for yet. But it's so, for some people, it's so different from my spiritual formation books for children that it's just kind of mind-boggling. But it's about Darwin and his family, and a project of investigation that they did together. So this is Charles Darwin, the Darwin, and I have always, since I started learning about him and the way he did science, I've always been just really enthralled with his delight in learning about the natural world and understanding it. And as I read more about him in recent years, I've realized that he was a very emotionally fragile person.
Mm.
And actually, the reason that he set aside the Christian faith that his wife um, espoused and that he had been brought up in, and he had even looked into for a while, training as a clergyman. But the reason that he left the faith was suffering. When, especially after his, I think she was 11, his oldest daughter died, and he was just crushed. He was just a very tender-hearted person, and so he found refuge in the practice of science investigation, and he brought his family into that, and so a number of them continued to do science when they grew up, and some of that in collaboration with him, and some of it on their own. So the story is about just this delightful investigation that a number of them were involved in, and I won't say more about it right now. And then finally, I have another contract that is in process. I've almost got to the level of final manuscript, and it's another spiritual formation story. And I can't really say more about that because it's in a new initiative that a publisher is launching. So I have to wait until they have a chance to announce, their new imprint. But that is a joy as well, and another book that I think will be healing and hopeful for children.
Well, as you know, this series is faith, hope, and love during an election. And, what we've been talking about today is things that we have faith in, how we're trying to show love and introduce God's love to children in our work for children. How are you in this really difficult time for yourself navigating faith, hope, and love? Are you finding it difficult to feel hope in something? Are you finding opportunities to receive and give love? Talk a little bit about that in this particular cultural moment, both with the pandemic, with the upcoming election in a few weeks, and just all the divisiveness and hardship that really we've been going through emotionally and as a country, and just on a kind of daily onslaught of abuses. You were talking about police brutality, and I think a lot of us are aware in new ways and in new dimensions about the scourge of that in our country right now. So how are you, if you are, and you don't have to be, but how are you holding on to faith, hope, and love right now?
It is sometimes hard. Well, it is often hard, I should say. I think that if it's not hard, then there's something wrong with us, because if our hearts are open to the world and to each other and to God, then life is difficult. Life is difficult now, because even if, like, for example, I have not suffered any loss or diminishment of my work. I'm just so thankful for that. I have been working for a number of years at the University of Chicago Press as a book editor, what we call a manuscript editor. And I've been so grateful that it has continued to be a wonderful place of employment. And I have not, there have not been threats of layoffs in our department. That is not the case for so many people. So my son lost his job, and only got another one weeks later. A niece and various people that I know have lost their work and have been thrown into that uncertainty. And and then there are just so many other things, people that I know that or know of whose lives have been lost to the pandemic, and the rawness of the vulnerability of for many people. I think I just have become even more sensitive to the how my sisters and brothers of color, whether they're Latinx or Black or Asian, how they've been experiencing the pandemic and the police crackdowns on peaceful protest. I shouldn't say peaceful protest. Who was it that said that protest is never peaceful? It's always stirring up. It's always stirring things up, and it's always challenging the status quo. But creative nonviolent resistance, and how our governments in general, and it generally doesn't matter what party's in control of a city, but most of the cities have seen terrible treatment of protesters. So how to keep afloat in this very stormy sea that we're in, right? It happens that during Advent, I think it was last December, that I started really in serious reading a page or so every day from Julian of Norwich's showings. And I have that book here as well because it became my faithful companion. And I'm just going to show the book so that people can recognize it and pick it up somewhere. This is that one that that's edited by and has a lot of supplemental material by a man who's part of an order of those who honor Julian. And it's such a big book, but her words just blew me away over and over again. And I'm going to just read a few of them from the note taker on my phone, because it's a lot easier to find them than to try to find them, than to dig them out of all the pages. But Julian also had a very strong sense of the feminine in God. And interestingly, she saw that embodied in Jesus, who she pictures as the wisdom of God. And so wisdom, as you know, and scripturally is often feminine. And she just goes so deeply into that picture of God. And it doesn't mean that it's only feminine. It just means that it's deeper and fuller than most theology that I've ever read. And I've read quite a bit because of my editing work over the years. So I'll read you a couple of them. For as the body is clad in the clothes, so that's like the putting on Christ image from the book, and the flesh in the skin, and the bones in the flesh, and the heart in the breast, so are we, soul and body, clad in the goodness of God and enclosed. That's this thoroughness of being completely held and safe and doted upon. I think she might even use the word doting on. I can't remember. Our soul is created to be God's dwelling place, and the dwelling place of the soul is God, who is uncreated. And so this picture of indwelling of each other we find our home in God, but God is also finding God's home in us. And that is and this is a beautiful thing for her. That is the natural thing for human beings. Sin is the unnatural thing that where and she often speaks of it as mistakes, because she believes that ourselves, our souls, naturally yearn toward God. And, with my account of how I was as a child, you can see why I especially love that and resonate with that. But I hold these words. I hold these words and this sense. I try to keep them in my heart and my mind, and I also try to just be very especially attuned to and alert to the ways that God is expressing love to me, concrete ways, whether it's through gifts that people give me, of generous gifts, or whether it's through the way that situations in my life are working out, where I've gone through some very hard things this year, but it happens that I've been able to see how God's grace and God's presence were actually there giving me gifts through those hard things. And I I picture myself held by God. I also picture our world wrapped by God in that way. And our world's fighting a lot against God, and but also a lot of us are fighting to be nearer to each other and to be closer to the beloved community and the realm of God where love is expressed through justice, as Cornel West says. So that's my hope. Love is expressed in so many ways, and probably one of the main ways is for me is through closer contact with my family, which is, I have two children, but neither of them lives here. One is in Colombia, one is in St. Louis. More frequent contact with them through Zoom calls and texting, and my granddaughter, who's 9 years old, texts me and sends me little videos almost every single day. And I didn't have that before. We didn't have that kind of closeness before. But now we really need it. She needs it and I need it. And so we're giving presents to each other, presents with a CE, and then gestures. I've sent more flowers to friends since the florists reopened than I had ever. And sometimes it's because of a specific loss, but sometimes it's because I just, want a beautiful way to say I'm here and I love you. And even though we can't be together in person, and trying to support some of the mobilizations and the protests. I, with my age, am not a good candidate to be out there every day or anything, but sending supplies or support at different times has been a way that I can say I really love you and care about you. And just following the folks that are doing that kind of work on Twitter, for example, and amplifying what they have to say. They're small. They're my small. In Spanish, we have a saying, "Poner mi granito de arena." We're just putting in my little grain of sand, and that's what it is. All I have is these little grains of sand, but we trust that that like the bread and fish that were multiplied in the feedings that the Gospels record, that God will draw all of those little bits into the great work that God is doing.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thank you for your time today and for your wisdom and for the work you're doing. And the heart that you're bringing to this time. I think we're all feeling that little grain of sand feeling like, are we doing enough, or what are the things that we're doing making a difference? But I know you are making a difference, and the love that you show and the solidarity that you show with your neighbors really does make a difference. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Jen, for your recent book that came out. I have that here too, because this is part of We Need Ways to Grieve. In general, always we need to be able to grieve well, but in this time especially, there's so many things to grieve. And so your book, A Little Blue Bottle, came out recently, and I was so grateful to get a copy early on, and both the art and the text, which I know that you're a young friend of yours did the art, and it's so deep and is so beautiful. I think that the style is just so appropriate to these feelings that are deep in us, and as we lose people, as we lose hopes and dreams, and so you are putting in your grains of sand as well, and I just want to say that I really value that.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Well, and to everyone listening, you can find Ruth online at Ruth Goring Books, RuthGoring.com. And I hope you'll find her work and get to know more of what she's doing, which is important, and grains of sand or big boulders of effort. But I really appreciate you and love your work. So thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for this series that has been amplifying my own faith, hope, and love, and getting me ready for the election.
I'm so glad to hear it. All right. Well, thanks again, and I will talk to you soon.
Blessings and love to you.